Previously on Maplestory the novel, Sacred Tears.
And you knew who created these monsters? We all take risks, Commander Tahir.
Is it almost complete?
There is no ultimate light.
I don't even know what I've been fighting for anymore.
Xenos, that's too dangerous.
Like it or not, we're all in danger until the situation is resolved.
And now, the continuation of Chapter 21, Part 3.
Commander, are you alright?
I'm fine. Try to leave more time between your warning and your breaking of walls next time.
I doubt there will be a next time. Master Mars has locked down the entirety of Aurora. He's even gone so far as to declare you a radical nonconformist.
Will answered, grabbing the keys from the guards and unlocking the cell door to allow him and Vieren inside.
There's a giant hole in the wall. Why did you need to open that?
Demanded Tahir, as Vieren closed the cell, locked it, and then brought the keys inside, dropping them in the middle.
So it will be harder to follow. Come on.
Vieren urged, handing Tahir his dagger.
What about Xenos? Where is he? And where have you been?
Tahir demanded, motioning to Will.
Xenos is remaining behind as a scout. He'll let us know if things get worse. The shuffle of the crowd moved Will to a safe distance when we confronted Mars. Using that shuffle, he was able to escape and warn the others.
Vieren explained as they ran to the woods and their gathering place, where a dozen acolytes and clerics were waiting for them.
We managed to convince a few of them to join us after what they witnessed what happened in the temple.
Will explained, introducing them all to Tahir, who began drawing out plans to infiltrate the Aurora and stop Dane once and for all. Just as they were starting to move out, all of them felt a wave of instability flood over them.
What is this? I'm standing still, but the ground is moving.
One of the acolytes exclaimed. Two others fell to their knees and retched hard, shutting their eyes to ease their sick feeling. Tahir and Will both steadied themselves against a tree, while Eleanor struggled to keep her eyes open and not feel her stomach churn.
What is happening? It's like the world is spinning in its skin.
Eleanor muttered. Vieren slammed the end of his staff down as light exploded around them, only to die away just as quickly.
This is darkness. All the world's darkness is being drawn somewhere.
I know where it's headed, Tahir growled, drawing their attention to the wood-grained-like appearance of the ground, rushing in the same direction as the Aurora Temple. With urgent steps, the small troop hurried through the woods. As they ran, the whole world around them suddenly felt lighter, brighter than it had been in their entire lives. Their momentary happiness shattered when an explosion ripped through the air, blowing through the trees and tearing branches and leaves from them. The force threw them all to the ground as a cloud of dark purple flames rose above the canopies.
What was that?
An acolyte called. No one said anything as they regained their footing and balance and ran for the temple with more urgency. What greeted them was not the grand white and gold building they had known. Instead, they all stared in disbelief at the mountain of rubble. The surrounding trees had splintered, and the grass burned away, leaving nothing but ash and dirt behind. cold feeling descended as they neared, making them all break out in goose flesh. Near the center of the building, where the knowledge depository used to be, crouched a lone figure. Smoke like aura poured from his back, surrounding him in black flames. Coming even closer allowed them to see dozens of the Aurora clerics, some crushed and half buried under rubble, while others were impaled on the gold rods decorating the building. A noise at their feet made them all begin digging through the rubble, keeping an eye on the figure in the center, seeming not to care about their presence. A heavy mist began to fall on them as they dug, dampening their hair and clothes. Finally, they pulled back the stones to reveal Mars, battered and bloody. Eleanor lowered herself into the hole they had created and reached for his neck, barely able to feel a pulse. The touch made Mars open his eyes and roll onto his back.
Oh, it's just you.
The cleric wheezed, a fountain of blood dripping down his cheek as he coughed.
Mars, don't speak. Will can fix you right up.
Eleanor commanded, but Mars dropped a hand on her foot.
There's no time. Run. Run. The darkness has consumed the master. There is no hope for him now,
he said with a strained whisper. Turning his head to the sky, he closed his eyes, coughing again as blood soaked his magnificent mustache and ran down his face as the rain fell.
I knew the master was dabbling in the dangerous, but I wanted to believe in the future we hope to create. I wanted to believe.
His head slumped to the side as the crystals in his shining rod lost their glow. Eleanor's vision began to distort when she looked up and frantically searched over the rock piles, seeing something that made her chest heavy and her breath hitch. With desperate, stumbling strides, she went to the lone shining rod standing amid the rubble, digging frantically, hurling great slabs aside, until she uncovered Xenos' broken body. She nearly fell as she reached for him, cradling him against her leg and brushing away his blood-soaked brown hair, her quivering lips contorting as she broke. With an earth-shattering wail, Eleanor held Xenos to her, bawling into the crook of his neck. Tahir came over to her, kneeling beside her to offer his comfort, until he heard her breathing steadily becoming harder and quicker. Growls thrummed over her breathing as she looked up, locking her fury-filled eyes on the figure. Eleanor, stop. If what Ariel said is true, you won't be able to... With an almost dragon-like roar, Eleanor took up her sword, charging over piles of rubble toward him, swinging her sword so hard, a contrail hung in the air as it whistled. Spear-tipped chains burst from under the ground, catching the blade as sparks flowered all around him, bursting across the rubble, some of them rushing to Paladin as she deflected them with her shield and attacked again. More chains blocked her every swing, her heartbroken screams nearly in time with the clap of her sword against the chains, until Eleanor was thrown back, disappearing in a cloud of dust. Tahir ran for her, trying to wave aside the dust to find his friend, when he saw her leaning against her sword on one knee, blood flowing down the side of her face. Eleanor, please stop! We need to retreat and regroup, Tahir commanded. Wind rushing by him as Eleanor charged again, dropping her shield and jumping high, holding her broadsword aloft as golden light tinged with red burst around the blade.
I will sunder your soul and drag your corpse through Halcyon!
She bellowed. As she swung with a pain-filled bellow, the figure looked up at her, turning her scream to one of fear. Terror blinded her to the chains coming from her side, driving through her tough armor and skewering her from all sides, holding her aloft. Silent shock overtook the group as the sound of blood hitting the ground made them all pale. Eleanor wheezed and moaned, tears staining her face and streaking the blood on it as she struggled to move, lifting her sword up to strike, despite being so far from her target.
I'm sorry, Xenos. I'm sorry.
In a blur, the chains swirled, ripping her body apart and showering the rocks with her blood before it all disappeared into a cloud of ash. A stunned silence fell over everyone until an acolyte gripped her staff harder and shouted over the quickly building rain.
We have to stop him here. We have to stop him! He can't be allowed to leave!
An acolyte shouted, spurring the other acolytes and the few remaining clerics into action. Light hummed on each of their staves, cutting through the nighttime air like knives as chains appeared and broke the beams like glass, sweeping across and throwing them all to the ground. Everyone scrambled to their feet again, charging the figure as they unleashed bursts of light and sweeping arcs that cut through the chains thrown at them, sparks raining all around them. Within moments, the figure had been surrounded by a containment spell, powered by 4 clerics who decided to follow Tahir. But their victory was short-lived as the figure lowered his head, the shadows of the cloak's hood pulling back just enough to reveal the smirk on his face.
Pointless,
he growled, chain spears bursting from the ground, shattering the containment and driving through the surrounding team, tearing their bodies apart as they disappeared into a cloud of ash. It happened with such speed that the containment spell hadn't fully dissipated. Tahir, Will, and Vieren only stood in disbelief and terror, unsure what to do as they were the only 3 left alive from the Aurora. After a moment, Vieren began to frantically look around, pointing in directions as though trying to remember where specific halls used to be, running for the living quarters with Tahir close behind. Vieren began to frantically look around, pointing in directions as though trying to remember where specific halls used to be, running for the living quarters with Tahir close behind. Once there, Vieren anxiously looked around, trying to remember where his quarters had been, only to find a mountain of rubble. Tears ran down his cheeks as he began to dig through it, calling for Tassia. Tahir also began digging through the rubble, knowing the panic-driven fear Vieren felt. It was the same fear he'd felt when the Omens attacked and killed Talea and his daughter so many years ago. In his heart, Tahir prayed that he wouldn't be the one to find her, and in the end, he didn't. But when Vieren did find her, she was already dead. With tender care, he lifted the last of the rubble from her broken body, screaming into the crook of her neck while cradling her in his arms and rocking back and forth. Beside him, Tahir noticed that his shining rod's glow began to intensify, lighting the dark area with an angry white light as dark mist rose from his back. Vieren, whatever you're thinking, you must stop now. But Vieren ignored him as he laid Tassia down, grabbed up his rod, and charged the man sitting in the center.
Vieren, stop!
Shouted Tahir, reaching for him but missing as he teleported away. Will saw what was happening and tried to intercept him, but was thrown aside as Vieren shattered Will's entrapment spell. Teleporting into the air, Vieren raised his rod above his head, unleashing an enormous wave of blinding white light.
I will have your head, White Mage!
The wave hit Dane hard, shaking the ground with its force. Dust cleared in a flash as Dane threw his hand out, spear-tipped chains bursting from the ground. With another heartbroken scream, Vieren loosed another wave of light that shattered as the chains punched through it and Vieren, holding him in the air. Silence hung thick as Tahir and Will looked on in horror. The glowing links nearly replaced all of Vieren's body as so many pierced through his torso. With a wave of Dane's hand, the chains all spread, ripping Vieren's body apart before it all evaporated in a cloud of ash. Whispers filled the air as the white mage turned his torrid red gaze to them, chains rushing from under him toward them. Will summoned his Aurora staff, a wall of light appearing, blocking the chains but cracking the spell with the impact. Tahir grabbed his dagger, rushing at Dane as Will dismissed the wall. Chain spears rained all around Tahir as he ran, jumping from rock to avoid the weapons as they obliterated boulders around him. As Tahir neared, a chain swept across, hurling Tahir into Will, who fought his own battle against dozens of chain spears swarming around him. With the two of them together, Tahir and Will fought back the swarm easier, but with each minute that passed, their bodies began to tire, and an ever-growing fear built within them. The chains gathered into one large group, hitting Will hard enough to throw him aside, ripping the rod from his hand. Will ran for his rod after landing, jumping to grab it. But as he was about to touch it, chains exploded from the ground through his body, halting his mid-air flight. He could hear the commander call to him from far away as a frigid feeling swelled within him. He could feel the chains beginning to pull in all directions, pulling sinew from bone and muscle from muscle. But there was no pain. Instead, he felt as if he were simply disappearing. Somewhere in the far distance, he thought he heard a woman scream. He knew that voice. It was Rhinne's voice. But she was back in the Temple of Time with her mother. How could he hear her? All at once, he saw Tahir's dagger spin through the chains under him, cutting him down to the ground. As the chains within his body dissipated, the blood began to flow, deepening the cold. From the ground, chains rose, aiming down at him. Tahir forced his tired body to move, running to his downed friend. Just as the chains began to drive down, Will heard thuds and squelches, making him look up to see spearheads and chains poking through Tahir's chest and gut standing over him.
I thought you wanted to cure the world of its darkness. Don't become it,
grunted Tahir, barely standing after the chain spears had punched through his body, hearing a dark chuckle as Dane spoke.
I have erased it, and from it, I have created a power that not even the gods can defeat. There is one last thing I need, and it would all be over.
Willing every last bit of strength left to him, Tahir stumbled to Dane, latching onto his cloak so as not to fall.
You were the white mage, the one who would save us. You can't do that as a black mage,
Tahir hissed. Dane looked down at him, grabbing his shirt and hauling him into the air.
I am saving you by getting rid of it all. And please, call me Magus Sloe,
he growled, throwing him aside, pulling the chains from his body one by one before carving up his body and vaporizing it into a cloud of ash.
Thank you for all you have done, but your services are no longer required,
Sloe barked, walking to Will, who lay heaving for breath. Ash swirled from each of the wounds in his body, unable to move. Sloe stood over him with blank, uncaring eyes glowing in the dark of his hood.
You were never worthy of my daughter, child,
he whispered, walking away to the west. He had the power to go where he needed and obtain what he required, but he could not do it alone. No, it's not that he couldn't do it alone. He just didn't want to expend the energy unnecessarily. He would need soldiers, commanders, and generals. A dark smile spread across his face as the first names came to mind. Arcarium, the master of dark alchemy, Hilda, the reaper of Aswan, and her half-dragon lover, Magus, the Dracova exile. The rain steadily poured down harder and harder, wiping away the blood from Will's face. With each breath, staying awake became harder and harder, turning his vision skyward as drops would hit his eyes. Thoughts of Rhinne mocked him, his body having gone numb and no longer feeling the agony that plagued him moments before.
I'm sorry, Rhinne. It looks like we won't be able to see that sunset after all,
he whispered, swearing he could see the hazy outline of Rhinne kneeling beside him, her face stained with tears and her failing smile twisted in grief. Will thought he could see her trying to say something, but couldn't tell if he couldn't hear her ethereal form or that, in his last moments, he'd gone deaf. Regardless of the reality, Rhinne stayed near him, setting a hand on his chest until the raindrops all around them slowed to a crawl, while the hazy image of Ariel appeared next to Rhinne with a smile. Ariel also said something, waving her hand as Rhinne turned back to him with slightly more hope in her red eyes.
Will? Can you hear me?
Will could barely muster the strength to nod, reaching for Rhinne's hand, which she took in earnest and moved close enough to whisper to him.
I'm sorry, Will. I'm not strong enough to save you this time. Please forgive me.
She whimpered as Will patted her hands, struggling to smile as the last of his strength ebbed away. Within moments, Will's sight was gone, and his breathing slowed, letting out one last breath that only Rhinne could hear before his body fell limp.
I love you, Rhinne.
Rhinne tried to answer, but as she mouthed the words, his face and skin grayed, crackling and falling apart as his body disintegrated into a cloud of ash, and his glasses fell into her hands. Trying to reach out for any part of him that was still solid, Rhinne tried to capture as much of the ash as she could, but each catch only released what she already held until there was nothing left. Slumping to her knees, the rain's hushed roar was drowned by her scream of agony, clutching Will's glasses to her chest as Ariel went to her, kneeling beside her. Rhinne buried her face in Ariel's chest, muffling her cries as Ariel embraced her. It was the only thing she could do to comfort her daughter in her time of immense